Thank you so much for staying with us. This is still Daybreak on Trust Television, and we have just finished up with the discussion segment, and we're moving on to the newspaper review segment, where we have Dr. Theophilus Abba, who is the program director, Daily Trust Foundation, as he joins us to review the headlines on the pages of some of today's newspapers. And we're going to start with our own paper, which is the Daily Trust paper this morning, and we have the headline story here. Appeal Court insists on Governor Yusuf's sack, admits error in certified judgment. And the rider here, we have protest rock Kano. NNPP approaches Supreme Court, rejects request for CTC retrieval. Judgment read in court more important, that is the APC saying this. And contradictory verdict, embarrassing, scandalous, that is Yadudu and Falana. And we have details of this story in page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. And the picture story here, we have some NNPP supporters in Kano protesting over contradictions in certified judgment of appeal court just yesterday. You can see the protests rocking Kano. And below that, we have 25 killed in Niger road crash. We're still recording crashes on the road, and you can find details of that story on page 31 of the paper. And Jaiz Bank appoints Haruna Musa as MD and Chief Executive Officer. Details of that story on page 28. Nasara Guba dispute, appeal court delivers judgment today. We await details of that particular judgment delivery, but you can find details of the story on page 13 of the paper. Ondo in coma as Akeredolu hangs on to power. Well, that's the politics in Ondo State, but details of that story on page 12. And above the headline, we have a missing radio tower. NSCDC takes responsibility, begins investigations. You can find details of that story on page 6 of the paper. Oshun governor knocked for failing to hold cabinet meetings. You can find why the governor has been knocked for that and details around all of that on page 31 of the paper. And lastly, how army police clash led to inspector's death in Adamawa. There's been a lot happening in Adamawa State, but you can find details of this particular story on page 5 of the paper Daily Trust.
Now let's go to the Punch newspaper. Starting from above the masthead there, we see Niger junta sues Tinubu. ECOWAS court rules December 7. That story is on page 3. Besides that, we see fresh Naira scarcity hits Kano, Sokoto, Edo, others. That story is on page 25. Also, FG slashes wage award by 100 billion Naira as Labour kicks. That story is on page 30. For the lead story on the Punch newspaper, we see Kano poll controversy. Police, NNPP protesters clash. More cloud over judgment. There are a couple of riders beneath that headline, which states court APC blame clerical error. NNPP, Labour Party insists judgment doctored. Yusuf heads for Supreme Court, says appellate court lacks jurisdiction to determine party membership. We see a pictorial there of soldiers and some gunshots on a wall, as well as bullets there. However, Fintiri intervenes as soldier kills inspector in Adamawa. Below that, we see Senate passes MTEF to probe tax waivers under Buhari. Catch that story on page 21. Police tear gas protesters shield Oshun CJ from mob. Page 28, that story. Also, 1.2 billion naira fraud. Emefiele gets 300 million naira bail restricted to Abuja. That story is on page 28. These are some of the headlines on the front page of the Punch newspaper.
Now we'll move quickly to Daily Sun paper with the headline story there. Oshun, Edo, Anambra, Kano top 2023 electoral offenders list. And the rider there, 187 lawyers, 16 senior advocate of Nigerians to begin prosecution of suspects, 1,076 arrested in 35 states. You can find details of this story on page 6 of the paper. And just beneath that, we have FG moves to unlock $300 billion in deed capital via land reforms. Well, We can find details of that story and how the federal government intends to achieve that on page 23 of the Daily Sun. Then former CBN Governor Emefiele gets 300 million naira bail. That's an interesting one, but you can find details of that story. I'm sure a lot of Nigerians would be interested in that particular story. On page 4 of the paper, Kano Guba NNPP protests urges NJC to review court rulings. On the right there, appeal court admits clerical error in judgment body, pressure on justices. And also, you can find details of all of that story on page 27. Court declares Buhari's appointment of FCC's chairman secretary unlawful. Details of that story on page 5. Nigeria facing worst economic crisis, says Reps. If you were part of the program this morning, whilst we had our discussion segment, you'd recall we talked about the economic crisis, especially in the agri sector. But you can find details of this story on page 6 of the Daily Sun. And just above the headline story, we have fuel will have supply to last beyond Christmas. This is Gary, and he tells Senate. On the right there, Akpabio pledges support for NNPLC. Details of that story on page 25, and that's about it on the Daily Sun.
And then we move to the Guardian newspaper with a very glaring headline, and of course, we see statistics. Poor funding raises concerns for 270 new private varsities. That story is on page 6. More universities, less research output, as well as quality. They say the total number of universities may rise to 528, among which 418 are private owned. Between 2018 and 2022, over 5 million candidates who applied for admission were unable to secure placement. Out of 1.8 million candidates who applied in 2022, about 600,000, representing 33.3%, were admitted. You want to know more? Well, read page 6 of the Guardian newspaper for more details. Below that, we see tension in Kano over Guba verdict as Akeredolu Aiyedatiwa crisis rocks Ondo. That news is on page 6. Below that, Senate laments cyber threat to digital economy, $500 million yearly loss. Page 3, that story. Also, court grants Emefiele 300 million naira bill, orders CBN to update CSOs on e-Naira. And as well, we see over 200 billion naira exchange rate differential pushes FAC disbursement to 906.96 billion naira. That's on the business page on page 18. And we also see Adilabu, aviation safety, and profligacy of public officials. That's the editorial of the Guardian newspaper, and you can catch that on page 12. These are some of the stories on the front page of the Guardian newspaper.
And like I said earlier, we're going to be talking about majority of the stories. And I think one of the stories that is catching my attention there is the whole NNPP and the APC issue in Kano State. And Dr. Theophilus Abba, who is the Program Director, Daily Trust Foundation, he is here to join us to review the headlines of the pages. So what's your take on that particular story?
Well, it's quite disturbing that the Court of Appeal will say there were clerical errors. If you know the errors that were committed, I don't think they are just clerical. You know, when you talk about clerical errors, maybe you have typo, you know, mistakes, spelling mistakes, you know, maybe a major of grammatical mistakes. You know, those are some of the things you call clerical errors. Now, when a basic concept in law, like respondent and appellant, you know, you see, these are basic, a concept that anybody, you know, in law shouldn't make mistake about them. You are asking that this is in favor of the respondent or in favor of the appellant. You know who the appellant is.
Right.
Appellant is the person who went to court.
Right.
So the respondent is somebody who is like accused.
Perhaps for context, I should read it out. So he said the CTC showed that in the lead judgment delivered by Justice Moore Asemo Ibrahim Adume, the judge held in one of the concluding paragraphs on page 68 that I will conclude by stating that the live issues in this appeal are hereby resolved in favor of the first respondent and against the appellant. I think that was what you were alluding to now. The appellant in the appeal is Governor Abba Kabir Yusuf, while the first respondent is All Progressive Congress. So,
no, there's another paragraph
of the appellant
that mixed it up. You understand? So you now have a CTC, a Court of Appeal judgment that is mixing basic concepts in law, talking about respondent and appellant. Yeah, that is beyond clerical mistakes. So what I feel, that is my own, from the outside, is that perhaps there were not only one person who wrote that judgment. Okay. Maybe 2 or 3 persons wrote the judgment. And maybe somebody was asked to unify whatever was the judgment. And then that mix-up came up, because when you talk about judgment, you are saying that somebody is the one who has been, who have been vindicated. And you now go back to say, oh, it's a clerical error. This kind of thing is not supposed to be found in legal documents. Although I think the registrar of the court was saying there's room for us to correct clerical. Clerical errors are actually typo, grammatical, but not of this nature.
And now look at the resultant effect on the doctor, people. The youth are already protesting.
Doctor, should this be causing so much noise and so much tension as it is causing now, bearing in mind that the judgment was delivered verbally and then the CTC was released subsequently? Now the court has maintained that its judgment stands. However, do you think that this will in any way affect maybe the appeal of the judgment at the Supreme Court?
No, actually, this is the lawyers who have to debate all these things. But let me tell you one thing. You see, the idea of writing anything down, the idea of writing anything down in printed form is that it has been verified.
And documented. Not
documented, it has been thoroughly verified. When something is written down, it means that somebody has gone through it, it has been read, it has been edited. That is why when you write anything, you are prosecuted for it. Because it is believed that you have revised it. Part of writing is revision. You must have revised it, must have edited it, must have made corrections. Even when you talk about clerical errors, it shows that those who did the job are very tardy. Right. So if somebody says, okay, the one that was read out in court is superior to the document, there's nothing like that. You see, the document is where there should be no mistake. Sincerely, in the word of writing, in that word of writing, the document is where there should be no mistake. It is. You can make a mistake, when you spoke, because maybe you are speaking extempore, maybe you are overcome by emotion and things like that. But when it comes to writing, you must check and recheck, cross-check, what you have written before you push it out. Right. So this excuse sincerely, the spirit of the judgment from what they are saying is that, the governor has been thrown out. The Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal supports what the tribunal said. That's the spirit of the judgment. So, Doctor, but you see, this error is giving opportunity for people to still feast, on this issue. To say, well, something must be fishy. Somebody must have, that's the prayer we have been given. There's
compromise somewhere.
Yes, someone must have been compromised somewhere. Maybe that is not what the judgment was intended to be. Then, in the process of making corrections, some corrections were not properly done. You understand what I'm saying? So those are some of the situations that you hear around. But it's quite unfortunate. You see, like Obasanjo said, I think 2 days ago, right, and I agree with him, that when people have voted, and you now subject the decision of maybe
the vast majority of people,
the vast majority of to the knowledge of 3 persons is unfair. You understand? Because the spirit of the vote that took place in Kano, you must, it's very clear that NNPP won the election. You said, okay, what do you call it? That some ballot papers were not stamped and they were not signed. Who is supposed to sign them?
The PO.
Is it electoral officers that are supposed to sign the ballot papers? The if they didn't sign, what did they say? Because unless you are telling you that, NNPP, got these papers, and then how did INEC papers go out? There are a whole lot of things. So the reason why you see this kind of protest is because people are believing that perhaps, something went wrong.
Now, Doctor, perhaps something went wrong, and you were clinical on stating emphatically that the document should be where there is no mistake. I understand this because aside being, the director at the Daily Trust Foundation, you were also an editor of the paper. But then again, like I asked, could this be a technicality upon which we see a different verdict at the Supreme Court?
Well, the Supreme Court judgment, you cannot predict how they will look at.
Of course. So we are not trying to predict without prejudice to the Supreme Court. But this is a technicality that doesn't look like it's going away anytime soon.
But if the governor, if the NNPP decide to go to the Supreme Court, they will have grounds. They will have a list of reasons why they are going to the Supreme Court. You say reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, reason 4. You understand? And the Supreme Court can say, well, we agree with you, we disagree with you.
Of course.
I'll give you an example. In the case of Hope Uzodinma in Imo State, that was the previous election, the 2019 election. Something happened. He didn't win the election. He went to the tribunal, he lost. He went to the Court of Appeal, he lost. He went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, well, the INEC removed some of these ballot papers, which we consider to be not valid, but INEC does not have that powers. So they now said, okay, we'll give the judgment to Hope Uzodinma or the APC. Now, what I'm saying is that we cannot predict what the Supreme Court will say, because they could go to the document, say, okay, the Court of Appeal in so and so area, and we have new, from what we are seeing, this is what the Court of Appeal ought to have done. So we don't know what the Supreme Court will say. But then this kind of error, will now give the appellant reasons to insist that the judgment was not maybe properly handled.
All right. Now, Doctor, just moving away from that, but still in line with elections, another story that is coming to my mind here is the one from the Daily Sun, where we talked about Osun, Edo, Anambra, Kano topping the 2023 electoral offenders list. And 187 lawyers, 16 senior advocates of Nigerians to begin prosecution of suspects, and 1,076 arrested in 35 states. Do you think this prosecution will actually impact on electoral offenses?
Well, from previous election that we have held in this country, many offenders were recorded. Many offenses were recorded. Offenders were recorded, but we have not seen prosecution. I've been, around for some years now, and I've been covering election for some years now, but I can't remember any Nigerian who has been prosecuted and convicted for electoral offenses.
Right.
I cannot. So eventually, if this changes, if we can follow through, in prosecuting those who committed this offense, it will be a deterrence to others in future election. To say, oh, if you snap ballot boxes, you are not going free.
Right.
If you buy votes, you are not going free.
Right.
If you killed anyone, you are not going free. You understand? It will be like a deterrence to. Then we want to see even INEC officials who are collaborators in electoral offences also punished.
Right.
But we don't hear much of that. We are not hearing the dismissal of INEC officials. We are not hearing them being sanctioned, even when open wrongs were committed by officials of INEC. So if Nigerians see the court system, the INEC coming up, pursuing through, following through, the process of ensuring that those who commit offenses are prosecuted and punished, then it will encourage Nigerians to say, well, we have confidence in the system. It will deter others from engaging in such crimes.
Okay.
All right, Doctor. We are short of time, but there's this other headline that I really would like your perspective on. If you would just bring the Guardian newspaper up on the screen. Poor funding raises concern for 270 new private universities. That story is on page 6. So we saw the statistic that was released by the Guardian. The total number of universities in Nigeria may rise to 528, among which 418 of them, are private owned. But then again, we're having more universities with less research output and quality. Doctor, isn't this something to be worried about, especially when we are seeing an expected rise in tuition fee and an introduction of the student loan?
Well, I disagree with the story fundamentally because, for you to obtain a degree, understand, you must write a project, and that project is research. For you to obtain a master's degree, you must do your dissertation, and that dissertation is research-based. For you to obtain a PhD, you must write your thesis. So you can't tell me that there are less research being done. It's not true. Hypothetically, it is not true. Because we do a lot of research. The only thing you can tell me is that there are no follow-ups. You can tell me that, government is not taking the research work seriously. Nobody is taking a look at what they are, and the implications for the development of Nigeria. But for you to say there are no research works is not true. A lot, because as a fundamental requirement for you to get any of the certificates, you must do research. One of the things I like the story for is this. You are talking about no funding. You see, private universities are actually contributing to knowledge in Nigeria. And I will advocate that TED Fund should give them funds. The way they are funding federal universities, TED Fund should support private universities as well. You see, because what they are doing is to groom those that will build the country. And you see, the fees that students are paying, to me, it's not enough. Government needs to step in. I'm not saying that you pay salaries for their lecturers. I'm not saying that you take over their recurrent expenses. But there should be a way of saying, okay, you have how many students? We have 3,000 students. Okay, we're giving you this support. TED Fund, if you build blocks of classrooms for government universities, build 1.5 for private universities. There should be that kind of support because they are contributing to the development of Nigeria.
All right. Thank you very much, Doctor. I would have to pick up this conversation subsequently as we're completely out of time now. Dr. Theophilus Abba, the director at the Daily Trust Foundation, thank you so much for coming on the program to review the papers with us.
Thank you very much.